So we talk in the article, $1.6 trillion will go to the millennials, making them the richest generation in history, an average of 1.2 million a family. I know we're all sitting here going, well, where's my 1.2 million?
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with the frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're wicked glad you did. Now, turn on those washes and turn up the volume. It's time to go Beyond Clean.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Ron Hetrick, Director of Staffing Products and Data at Emsi. And Hank, I'm just going to go ahead and let you tee this interview up. This is a group that you found because they do great work on social media and especially their YouTube channel. But once I started listening to what they had to tell us about the labor market and really where things are starting to head into a direction and really uncharted territory. So I think on this interview today, there's going to be some great concepts, not only for frontline technicians, but also some really good insight for supervisors, managers, and directors about just how important culture is going to be in the next decade or so to really make sure that you can maintain appropriate staffing levels to deliver solid quality care to patients.
Everybody knows, Justin, that we've got challenges in sterile processing, finding people and keeping people. And those problems have been around, for years, for decades probably. But that interesting dynamic, with the pandemic, with the staffing and agency pressures on these departments. So when I saw the content coming out from Ron and his team, I said, oh my goodness, this is speaking to the real life challenges for department leaders, but to your point, also the experiences of technicians on how do they market themselves in a changing landscape out there. And I totally am looking forward to this conversation. It's going to prompt a lot of secondary conversations, hopefully some innovative thought and strategy out there for how to create a department that is ahead of this demographic curve that we're going to be discussing. So yeah, if you are on the fence about finishing this episode and listening to this intro, stay with us, okay? Listen back when you get back in the car. It's going to be worth turning back on.
All right, everybody, we'll be right back with Ron Hetrick, Director of Staffing Products and Data at Emsi. I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From the 17 studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Joining us now is Ron Hetrick, Director of Staffing Products and Data at Emsi. And I got to tell you, I've only recently discovered your work, Ron, and that's really thanks to my co-host here, Hank Balch, who found you and forwarded over some of the video work that you're doing on YouTube to really just talk about some challenges in the labor force, which really hits our industry, really hard right now. And so I've just been excited because there are so many themes that have come out and watching those videos that I had no idea was going on. And specifically around, this isn't just something that happened during the pandemic. These are long-term trends that are coming together at the very same time. So nobody knows what we're talking about yet, but they're about to find out. Thanks so much for coming on.
Sure. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. Hopefully we get some use, everyone.
Oh, I'm certain of it. And, one of the things that's going on in the sterile processing industry right now is there's a huge demand for temporary staffing. There was a lull because there were cancellations of all the elective procedures. And so all of a sudden hospital revenues kind of bottomed out. They weren't really generating any revenue. And then they said, we've got to get this revenue back. Plus we had all of these people who still need those elective procedures. Just because they weren't life threatening didn't mean that they weren't necessary. They were just more considered to be elective. And so now they're coming back in and they're trying to get caught up. And now the hospitals don't necessarily have the workers and they're really strained in that labor force. And so can you just tell us about your experience, and what you do at Emsi so that everybody's familiar with it before we really start talking about this drought of workers that we're really seeing across the country?
Sure. It's pretty important for me to talk a little bit about my background. I was a Bureau of Labor Statistics economist in Washington, D.C. for the first 8 years of my life, and started writing and doing a lot of research while I was at BLS. I then went to work for Allegis Group, which is the largest staffing company in the United States, basically a holding company. They own Aerotech, Tech Systems, and the like. And I was there for about 20 years. And in that role, did a lot of analyzing markets and was doing a lot of it because, either you want to move into a new market, you want to see if it's going to be good for staffing business, or you have clients in this market saying, hey, you guys used to be doing really good for us and now you're not finding anybody and I'm going to fire you. And we'd be like, hey, hold on. The market you're in is awful. Like, I just want you to understand we're squeezing water from a stone here. So, let's make sure we understand that. And it was incredible during that time that was the first time I actually really thought about the fact that maybe I live in a bubble because everybody's not a labor economist. They don't really know how the world is changing around them. And at that point, I started seeing a real opportunity to kind of switch my focus to creating data products that would help people understand what was going on around them, but in the most simplistic way possible. In fact, we have a motto right now called Make Data Dumb Again. The expectation that everybody's going to understand what you are an expert at is very naive, as I found. So that's what I do now at Emsi, is work on products really to evaluate any particular job in any market to say, hey, compared to everybody else, is this going to be brutal or is this going to be relatively less brutal, as we'll talk about today?
Now, Ron, on the topic of keeping things simple, there's a term that I think is going to come up a couple of times in this interview, and that's the term demographics. Can you define that for us and just give us a little bit of context? There's a dictionary definition, but why should the guy on the street, or in particular the guy or the gal in the hospital setting, care about this conversation of demographics?
Yeah, I like to look at data in one of two categories, demographic and then what I'll call pure labor data. So demographic data is anything around age, diversity. It could be what college degrees people have, who's conferring those degrees, how many people in a market are of this earnings level, how do people actually break down in that society? Is this like a senior citizen community or is this a very young population? If you start to hear those words, that can be fundamentally important right away as you start to go, well, we were going to locate our business in this particular market, but yet the type of people that would be our consumers are not the type of people that live in that market or the type of people that we would employ. We need a young population. Well, don't move to the villages in Florida. That's not going to work. And then you have, that pure labor data, which is what industries are in that market? How many people do they employ? How many people in a certain occupation are there in that market? How many people are available in those occupations? So those are, incredibly critical. Not only should we go here, but really right now is we've been here. Where did everybody go? And that's all embedded it's in the labor data. But as we talk about in the article we just published, there's a lot to do with the demographic side as well.
Well, in our context for hospitals, they're all over the country in every area, right? And so that question, as you posed it, it's not like, what do we put hospitals necessarily, as much as, okay, now we have hospitals. How do we staff these? And in particular, for our context in the show, in this audience, the industry of sterile processing is a highly technical job. There's no college degrees required. There's very limited standardized training. We have some industry certifications out there that are required in just a handful of states at this point. And so I'm curious, I know we're not unique in that description of the profession. So where does that challenge play out in this labor conversation? Can you just kind of provide an overview for that?
Absolutely. And just hearing you do this description, for years, one of the things that I've been relaying, I talk to a lot of manufacturing associations, and one of the things that I tell them is, I'll be in the room and I'll say, hey, everyone in here, you tell me if while you were raising your children, you told them to go to college or not. And I said, everybody raise your hand. Did you ask your kids to go to college? And everybody raised their hand. I'm like, okay, guess what? Well, all society did the same thing. So we have an entire generation that told their kids to go to college. I'm like, there is no secret why you're not filling your skilled trades positions right now. Now, this has been going on for well over 10 years. If you are aware of the skilled trade shortages, electricians, welders, things like that, those populations are getting older. They're retiring. There's no one there to replace them because we just simply do not have that population anymore. So it's actually becoming one of the most, this is crazy. What I'm about to say is just as upside down as you're ever going to imagine. We used to always talk about the unskilled worker, were the ones who always really got the shaft in a recession, right? The educated worker, they didn't barely even feel the pain. The unskilled worker, they're the ones who all got laid off and everything. That has seriously changed right now. We are seeing unemployment rates amongst unskilled, occupations. Right before COVID struck, they were literally at record lows. So the unemployment rate right before COVID hit was the all-time record low in a non-wartime situation. And it used to be like, well, that just means you can't get a STEM occupation, somebody in IT or math or something like that. And it's like, oh, no, we're talking extremely low unemployment rates for even things like warehousing and production. Now, unfortunate part of that is we all can find out during the remote era is these are not remote jobs. You can't just put an ad up across the country and go, I need a warehouse worker. That warehouse worker has to be right down the street or you're not going to staff that particular place. So a shortage of workers in that particular population means the inability of maybe doing just-in-time inventory, the inability of hiring techs on demand. They just may not be there at that time.
Yeah, we're probably going to have to get you on some of our sister podcasts to talk about that. Because when you talk about the logistics of just-in-time inventory and really related to that warehousing, because there's so many other things that are going on in terms of a shortage of raw materials and for production. But that whole point of what you just said about skilled labor, yeah, just try to have your deck reconstructed or, try to buy a hot tub or a bicycle or anything that gets assembled anywhere or requires some sort of a raw material. The prices for that shot through the roof. And, my contractor couldn't even take on any more bids because they couldn't keep up. Not only because they couldn't get people to build the deck, but they also couldn't get the materials to build it with. And I totally see what you're saying. And there's also this situation we're in where it's ripe for disruption, where college continues to cost more, but the people, as you said, that are getting jobs coming out of college, are less, like that's harder and harder to do, even though the investment, I feel like we're coming up on this breaking point that merges with a point where technology can literally, anybody who's motivated enough to self-educate could save on the college education and then ultimately draw that line into a skilled trade and all of a sudden flip the script and really do some entrepreneurial work. Do you kind of see that trajectory as well?
I want to see that trajectory. I really, really want to see it. I have a son who heads to college in the fall, and this conversation with my son is so incredibly relevant to this. This time we're talking. It's really weird. And you'll understand why in a second. He was like, I see these things in college. I'm not quite sure what I want to do. He goes, I've always kind of wanted to be like an x-ray tech, but it's not really a 4-year degree. But yet I want the fun experience of going to college for 4 years. And we're like, but you really want to do this? And he goes, yeah. And so I looked up the salary of an x-ray tech like here in Jacksonville. And it was much, much more than my daughter makes with her college degree in market and data analytics. And I was like, I don't know if anybody is aware that things are starting to switch around. The problem that we have is in the past, we would say that flipping of money, that attraction of money and those particular roles would have caused a change. And that's the reason why people got a college degree. They were always told, well, somebody with a college degree makes 20% higher. If it's a master's, it's X% higher. And that was actually, that was true. But now we're seeing it's flipping. But unfortunately, and we talk about this in the article, the motivation for money has really changed. And so just because something pays better doesn't guarantee that it will get filled. So I'd love to say that we were at a tipping point, but right now I don't know about how we fill practically any job, which is why my life is so depressing right now. So yeah.
You set me up perfectly for my next question because, right, we have this like labor shortage. I talked to a friend the other day. He lives in South Florida and he said, I'm out at my favorite restaurant and literally every single server and waiter and waitress is wearing a t-shirt that says we're hiring. And so there's this total shortage. And one of the videos that I watched on your YouTube channel was talking about this, again, that, yeah, there's a shortage because people may be reluctant to go back to work because of the pandemic. And there was all of this impact. But really what you were explaining was this was already happening. It just got expedited by the pandemic. And the basic thing that you described was, okay, we have the baby boomers, which are the largest generation in history, who then were also the first two income households. And to boil it right down, and I want you to provide some more detail on this, but to boil it down, their kids are living off of their wealth because they're also the wealthiest generation that the country has ever seen. And at the same time, they're exiting and retiring. And we have this other generation that is just entering the workforce. And it seems like they just don't want to work as hard in general, that they want to have more work-life balance. And so even if we had a 1-to-1 of incoming and outgoing, the problem that we run into is they want to work, maybe 60 to 70% of the hours or of the available work that needs to be done. And so you still have a shortage because you have a shortage of, I guess the lack of a word would be effort, the lack of commitment to what's required to meet the workforce demands.
Yeah, I want to be really careful here. What I'm about to say, if you grasp it, will be mind blowing, and it will click into place, and it'll explain everything that you're feeling. In the article, the demographic drought article, what we really tried to focus on, and this is something that early on I was like, we've got to make sure this point comes through crystal clear. You had two income families for the first time, but these people were these are people coming off the children of the silent generation. They were told working is life, like you've got to work, because their parents didn't have jobs and they were starving to death. So these people not only worked and made a lot of money, but they were obsessed with work. We all remember these movies in the 80s, 80-hour work weeks and people not even seeing their families and everything. And that became a standard because that's what the kind of work ethic these people had. Now, one of the important things there is what I just got done saying. You have a huge rush of people into the labor force. So to get getting a job was much more competitive, and employers were getting very picky because there was so much labor out there. Now, flip that to where we are now. It's easy to look at like the millennials and like a lot of people do go, man, these people are lazy. They don't engage. I mean, and the numbers certainly suggest that they don't. Their labor force participation rate's really far down. They want to work part-time over full-time jobs. These are all facts. We see it in the data, and we talk about that data in the article. But there's something about that that's really important. They're like that because they can be like that. You don't just work less or not work and you starve or you get evicted. You're doing it because your needs are being met. In the article, we talk about the fact that they're living at home. Well, why are they living at home? Because they don't need to be kicked out for the rest of the people in the family to survive. So they're not kicked out of the nest in the first place. The second part of that is that there is a lot of money in those households. So we talk in the article, $1.6 trillion will go to the millennials, making them the richest generation in history, an average of $1.2 million a family. I know we're all sitting here going, well, where's my $1.2 million? But we know it's not evenly distributed, but it is absolutely a reality. A survey came out just yesterday asking people why they weren't looking for work. And if you look at the responses, half the people said because they financially didn't need to at this particular point in time. There was another 25% that said it was fear, but I was like, nope, put the fear people straight into the money side because you will overcome your fear real quickly if it means living on the street because you don't have any money. So like to me, it's the signs are all there that people are just, I'll engage with work when I feel like it in the ways that I want to because I have options and I'll exercise those options when I want them. The boomers didn't have those. The boomers had to take a job if they had it, and they had to work their butts off to keep those jobs.
Now, Ron, we've brought up this article a number of times and want to position this specific to healthcare. I know we've brought that up, kind of on the side angle here, but in that study, the demographic drought, what implications surface, for you when you're looking at that for the healthcare space? Because obviously anybody who works anywhere, if you live in the United States, you're probably going to need healthcare at some point. So the applicability there is clear, but what about for these providers out there and the companies all over the U.S. and all over the globe who sell into the healthcare space in the U.S.? Like, what are these demographic statistics telling us? What are they telling them? What do they need to be paying attention to, in your opinion?
It's really incredible. We can actually look at healthcare the same way we'd look at maybe something like Social Security, which is at the time when we're probably going to have the greatest demand for healthcare is also the time when we don't have people to staff healthcare jobs. It's funny, like what COVID did last year is it made a series of traveling jobs insanely attractive. We have some clients who provide, nurses, traveling nurses. And to a point where one of our clients literally said to me, can you give us data so that we can tell people to stop doing this insanity with these pay rates? Like they just kept throwing the rates higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. And they're like, look, this is unrealistic that we should be doing this. But what it did is all those people saw those rates and they all were abandoning their local hospitals and populating these travel jobs. Now that, like a lot of things with COVID, those things will iron out. And I really don't like to pay too much attention to it. But what it did was it exposed a weakness. And that is we didn't have depth. So once these people got taken, there was no one to come in behind them. And we talk a bit in the article about this. Whether you're a hospital, a restaurant, I have a friend who owns a bunch of gas stations. He stopped doing overnights, the 24-hour gas stations. They can't staff anybody overnight. So they just kill that shift off. Hospitals, the same thing. And one of our writers made sure that this went in. We're used to going in the hospital and having 5 people wait on us. But now it's like, no, you're going to get 1 or 2. And they're going to be stretched thin. Like your friend who went to the restaurant and the people saying we're hiring, service is way down in restaurants. It's taking much longer. You can't open as many sections. That's reality. That's now hospitals. So that's the hospital side first. The second part is you're talking about people like people selling into these hospitals and doing things as well. Well, obviously demand's going to be there. I just said like we're having a huge population. The boomers are really going to need these services. But the problem that you have as well is the people who are selling in, like every sector right now is set to explode this year. I mean, we pinched a hose last year. We twisted a hose on the economy that was really, really cooking. And so now it's trying to explode back. But talent, the lack of people is really holding us back, as you see with the 9.3 million job openings right now. And so we had an article written recently about quit rates this summer. There are going to be quits like crazy, and you're going to have organizations trying to make up their sales. If you are selling things at the hospital, understand that your sales force is going to be under massive attack in the summer, just from people trying to come in and get salespeople because they need to make their move right now and recover everything that they lost. We're already seeing that. The service side, if there's people, even with what you all do, we're talking about the technician side. Circling back to what I said earlier, is that population not even there. So, unfortunately, that population is also the one that's not re-engaging. It's way too detailed, but just understand 16 to 19-year-olds, they've already recovered back the amount of people participating in the labor force. The people right before retirement, the boomers right before retirement, their labor force participation rate's back to where it was. You know who's not? Everybody in between, 25 to 54 years old. They're still way down. So this is that element of, okay, there's an element of the extended unemployment benefits. There's no doubt about it. But there's also that element of we were seeing a declining trend. It really came down. And what's happening is the states are starting to get tougher on unemployment. These people are switching and they're just dropping out of the labor force. That is a huge, huge concern right now. So, I know we're not talking about that just with medical, but it applies to everybody.
Well, you just said a number of things that I want to follow up on. The nursing staffing company and their experience that you described is super relevant and almost a one-to-one relationship with what we're seeing from staffing firms in sterile processing. Very similarly, the rates are going up. I want to break this out in some quick hitting chunks, right? So not quite a yes or no answer, but do you think that ultimately will adjust wages for those professions? Because if you're just pulling people out of the hospital to go to another place and it's just this big rotation of staff, but there's still a shortage, does that mean they'll pay more as a direct employee of a hospital because they're just looking at it saying, we're paying these astronomical rates because we're so short-staffed we can't deliver care?
What else can you do but raise rates? And what else do you do if the rates don't work?
Music to every sterile processing technician and manager's ears right there, that answer. And I want to add another thing, and it's really around this change in reimbursement for hospitals, okay, is the Accountable Care Act. And the way that hospitals, or one of the ways that hospitals have had reimbursement changes, there's actually two aspects. One is that it used to be that if you got an infection when you went in for a surgical procedure and you got readmitted, the hospital just kept making money. And now, if you get readmitted within 30 days and it's 6 months, if you have an implant, the hospital has to foot that bill, if it's on the government funding, which is the largest payer. Okay. And so that's a huge issue. But the second part of this accountable care is essentially HCAP scores. And what that is it's a customer service style rating. So what they do is they get surveys from the patient and family experience. And if those ratings are poor, and you just described that situation, you're used to coming in, you've got 5 people waiting on you. Now you have 2, your whole experience has been impacted. That's going to impact reimbursement related to essentially patient satisfaction surveys. And so when you take those two and this real push that I think fundamentally was a positive thing for healthcare, and then you combine that with a nursing shortage that is looming like nobody's business and an already short-staffed situation in sterile processing, one that I don't even think the industry is totally aware of because they've been running lean in those departments and they're only now paying attention to true staffing models and training and quality in sterile processing. I think healthcare is careening towards a very, very tenuous situation.
It's incredible. I want to make sure we say something right now. People quit when things just become like, this is ridiculous. This is too much. They're working me like a dog. So when you have a worker shortage, you compound the problem because when you don't have enough people to do a job, you work the people that you have to death. And then they're just like, forget it. I'll get out of this whole business. I go do something else. Amazon's hiring their warehouse. That's at $15 to $18 an hour. I'll go do that. Boom. I mean, works for me. In fact, I've heard people working in those warehouses say like, we do work some of the time. And that's like, I'm sure that a lot of people who are getting crushed, that's pretty enticing. So it's my heart breaks. Like I cannot tell you how many times I've woken up in the middle of the night and I for some reason take the burden of all these companies on my heart. But it's like, I have been in restaurants where managers are bussing tables. I've been in places where the people who run the place are the only ones there to work because their help didn't show up that day. And you look at something like in the occupations that you have and you go, okay, what happens when you just can't get enough people? Well, things don't get done. And so that could be service levels dropping, or it could be just not getting done. So I was at a hospital about a couple months ago and I needed to go get a CAT scan, but they didn't have enough people to do it. So I had to wait like 4 hours to get it. And I was fuming by the time I went down to get it. And then, getting out of that thing later on, I forgave immediately. Why? Because I'm in a situation where I can look at that situation and go, these people are under a tremendous amount of pain. Yes, I'm feeling the pain, but I'm feeling their pain passed on to me. Well, this is not healthcare related, as I told you. Pain is going to be passed on to everybody. You talked about construction. A friend of my son's, their dad does fences. He's like, I'm booked for the rest of the year and I'm booked for most of next year. I'm not taking any more work. I can't do this. So fences don't get built. Pools don't get installed. These are inconveniences, but we are so used to being convenienced that it's going to be quite a shock.
With the downside, or with the pain, I think is the word that you use there. There is opportunity. I don't want to act like I'm the eternal optimist on the team because I'm probably the one who's always looking at the downside or what the challenges are. But anyways, there's got to be an upside to this for somebody, right? If you're looking at the data, if you're being strategic and thoughtful about what's coming down the pike, and I'm assuming like your clients, right? Because they're leveraging data to make smarter decisions. So where is the opportunity here for hospitals or for colleges that are training healthcare workers? Like, how do we do the best we can with this challenging, bad situation that's in front of us?
Yeah, I actually have an answer to this question. And the answer is, if I cannot give you more people, then what you have to do is what everybody else does in light of when they run into resource shortages, which is make best use of the resources that you have. I believe we're going to enter a time, and what I'm begging, especially manufacturing firms, it's time to go back out, hire your industrial engineers, go back and to the floor and relook at how you're utilizing labor. Look at the kind of work that they're doing. Look, I'm not saying you cut corners. I've got to be careful with my words here, but there are things where we have to look at this. What is work? What is this job made up of? What about this work would be attractive? What about the work is not attractive? I've talked to companies recently. I can't tell you what background they are, but their jobs are most definitely not attractive, and they're dying. And I'm like, it's so hard, but the good employers will train incredibly well. They will be excited. They will build a culture of excitement to get people engaged, because in this, man, don't downplay this. We took quits for granted in the past. Oh, that person, this and that, they were so needy, blah, blah, blah. Just let them go. Yeah, that attitude is just not going to work, because that person who leaves, even if they were lousy, is better than zero people. And now you're good people being overworked and they quit. So it does, I think it forces managers to be better managers. It forces people to get into the minds of the people better, to understand, how can I make this person happy? Not pander. How can I make the person happy? What is it about the job that maybe we've stuck to for forever because we could, but just like the rest of society, maybe we have to adapt or change that. And my hope in all of that is pay increases are coming, but guess what? When everybody gets a pay increase, it's the whole, when everybody's special, no one's special. And we have a whole society of people getting a pay increase, and inflation's going to eat all of that up. So that's not the answer here. The answer is can we make work more meaningful? Can the people who employ people do a better job of finding the passion that they have for why they created this company, why they got into this business, and can they pass this passion into the employee so that the employee doesn't feel like they're just a cog that comes in, hits a clock, makes you money, and leaves. It's like we got away with that for forever, but we can't get away with that anymore.
Well, I could tell you that's why I became an entrepreneur. I hated feeling that way, and I'm loaded with passion. And, it's really hard to lead people when you have that passion, but the organization looks at them as a cog. What I heard you say was, yes, the wages piece is there, but you better have sort of a merit and career path that's built around that, which actually fosters one of the most essential components of this, which you described as culture and work culture. And so if you create the right culture, the right passion, the right meaning, and then you give people, that career path that allows them to see their progression, that all builds into something that really can be a game changer and set your organization, your healthcare organization, apart from all the others when you have this demand for staff. Let me ask you one other question on that. Does that mean, because I know sometimes I've heard staffing agencies use the term desirable location. I can staff your facility because you're in a desirable location, and then you over here are not in a desirable location. Do industries that are niche like ours essentially wash that out based on identified subject matter experts, leaders, and mentors? Or does that desirable location, whether you're hiring or trying to do temp staffing, continuously play out in markets?
Yeah. So, we were talking earlier about remote versus non-remote. Remote, people who have the types of jobs that they can do remotely, there's a dynamic there where it's literally just about the work. For jobs that aren't just about, just about what I do, but there's actually a location element to it. I think right now we're observing something as jobs are starting to be filled, now, albeit pathetically, but they're being filled. And that is, it's this path of least resistance. So people are taking retail jobs before they're taking manufacturing jobs. They're taking those jobs before they take restaurant jobs. Why? Because a retail's in a nice air-conditioned environment. I don't necessarily have to interact with a jerk customer like I would in a restaurant. In a manufacturing environment, it may or not be air conditioning. It's repetitive work. I could get injured. People are taking this path of least resistance. Location is a path of least resistance. It's right down the road. I have children that I have dropped off at my mother's. I work, and then I have to get back there to pick them up, at the end of the day and get them dinner. This element, location, allows what I believe is the most important element, which we haven't talked about yet, to surface, and that is flexibility. It's funny, I've grown up, my career is going through when people were first starting the whole let's see if people could work from home or not. And then, I worked for the government at that time. They're like, no. And then they're like, well, maybe. And then, what you see is people going, flexible schedules, that's ridiculous. And then by the time I left the government, it was like, well, there's core hours, but you can be flexible around that. When I see people try to invoke their will onto the labor market, I literally laugh. Like you're going to go out there and tell the market what's for, our hours are this to this, and these are our working conditions, and you're going to sign here and everything. And I'm like, no, they're not. If you're in a location that is less desirable, you have to offset the location part with the other parts that make it desirable. So maybe it's the flexibility of, hey, name your shift. You tell us when you can drop this kid off. Maybe you have a spouse that works and you guys want to trade that thing up. You tell us what's good. You be more flexible than the person whose location is prime. But there's different triggers that you can pull. You talked one, which I absolutely do love, and this was told me by someone in another industry, is he was like, instead of just giving people cash, let them be involved in the leadership meetings. Like say, hey, after you've been here a certain amount of time, you're going to be in the room when we talk about the future of the company, where we're going, and you're going to be able to weigh in on those decisions. But empowering people to, once again, feel more important, that's another lever you can pull. So yes, location is an issue, but guess what? We've been filling jobs in poor locations for all of eternity. Now that it's tougher, we got to get more creative, and there's just some ways you could do that.
All right. Well, we've got to wrap up. But one thing we didn't do in this interview is we didn't define a term that you introduced, or you and your team introduced me to, which is the Sansdemic. And everybody's super familiar with the pandemic. And I realize it rhymes, but the Sansdemic, what does that mean? I realize it's everything we've talked about today, but what does Sansdemic mean to you?
Yeah, our communications head, Rob Sense, is the one who came up with that term, and he was just adamant, we're not getting rid of that term. And I love what he's saying. Sans, if you know French, means without. So Sansdemic, without people. And it just worked so incredibly well. So this idea that for all of history, we have always watched our population grow exponentially through all of history. We've only known one reality, but we're about to go into an inversion. And if everybody's hearing this for the first time, hear it. When you study population, you're not guessing, you're not estimating, you're certain. And we have not had a replacement birth rate since the early 70s, and our population is going to start inverting. So it'll start to shrink. Japan's already shrinking. Germany will shrink. Italy's going to shrink. These countries that are these developed nations have not replaced themselves, and the populations will invert. Will it be catastrophic like overnight? No, it's not the way it works. But it does mean that, think about gross domestic product. We just keep producing more and more. Why? Because more and more people are consuming it. But that's not going to be the case. There'll be less people. So you produce less product, which means the economy shrinks. But you're not in a recession. You're just adapting your output to meet the amount of people that you have. No one's ever thought about those kind of things before. In the interim, what you're going to see is a lot of pain. Why? Because the boomers who were contributing in the labor force are now not only not contributing, but they're pulling resources from the labor force. They need services, and we don't have people there to fill those jobs. So for this period of time, while the boomers, I don't know how you say it. There's not a general word for that, but meet their end. I don't know what you say. But until we get to that point, it's actually going to be much, much more painful. And then it'll ease up a little bit after that. But those implications are massive for the healthcare industry, which has grown exponentially in my lifetime, but eventually is actually going to run out of customers. They're going to have to start consolidating, but it'll make sense at that time because there won't be the need and you won't have as many workers. So consolidation may not be a bad idea.
Yeah, I could really see how the pain is coming. Okay, I love the term Sansdemic. I love the work that you're doing. I'm going to tell everybody that they can find you on YouTube, but they can also go to your website, www.economicmodeling.com. I also am going to let everybody know that in the write-up for this, we're going to link back to that article that you were talking about. And, with your permission, we can even post that article as bonus content on our iPhone and smartphone application. So definitely be on the lookout for that. I'm really impressed, Ron, and you've really got me thinking about something that really was sitting off on the sidelines for me as a conversation. It also makes me feel really good about our business just being so cutting edge and an innovator. I think some of that, just as we build our teams, I feel really good that we have that kind of environment to survive some of this pain. So is there anything you want to just add that you feel like has to be said before we close?
What we said at the end of the article to anybody's listening, people have never been as valuable as they are right now. We've never needed everyone as badly. Just saw the article that said, suicides were up dramatically last year. Overdoses were up dramatically last year. And I look at that and I'm like, wow, never has all of humanity been needed as much as it is right now. And that's the thing everybody needs to know is, if you're not happy in your job, there's probably a million others that will take you. And, just know that we need everybody.
Ron, fantastic job. Thanks for coming on and sharing your insight and knowledge with our audience today.
Thank you.
That was Ron Hetrick, Director of Staffing Products and Data at Emsi. And Hank, what a great find. You have a knack for pulling people onto the show with something very interesting and different to say. And I'll tell you, I got so excited for this interview. I didn't even warm up nice. I just jumped right in, not only before the interview started and we hit record, but then right out of the gate. Ron has just a phenomenal energy.
Yeah.
And he really has an important message to get out there. And I do want to just reinforce finding their YouTube page, which we'll link to. We'll definitely share a link to the article and their website, economicmodeling.com. And they have fun with it too. And we didn't really get into this in the interview, Hank, but he talked a lot with us, off to the side about these assumptions that we make, that people understand what we're talking about, and really breaking that down into simple terms. And I thought he did an awesome job with that today. And they have fun doing it on the YouTube channel, because sometimes they drink beer and they have relaxed conversations. And, we can learn a lot from this group. They've really got it going on right now.
If you're familiar with the phrase, I think everyone is, where you're like, you got one job. Well, I got one job, and it's to find good podcast guests, among other things, I guess. But yeah, this is a fantastic show. I knew Ron would do a great job. And it's interesting, like you bring up, their brand has a lot of fun talking about these very complex and important topics. But that's exactly what he brought up in the show is if you want to differentiate as a company, if you want to keep people and get people, you sure as heck had better have a great company culture. And it's very evident at their team at Emsi does. And to your point, Justin, we try very hard to have a great culture at Beyond Clean, and I think it shows through. But the challenge then is creating those cultures in our hospitals, right? Because you can't drink a can of beer on the clock at your hospital. So what do you do? And as everyone knows, or hopefully you know, if you listen to episode 1 of this season with Brian Dolan, we talked about happy high performers. If you missed that show, go back and check it out because it blends perfectly with this episode, because Brian's entire episode is why does staff satisfaction matter? How to create it in sterile processing. So he lays a lot of groundwork for that. So I highly encourage you to check that out as well.
It also makes me think about some of the work that Peter Nichols doing, and we see more and more tech schools popping up across the country to kind of formalize this, skilled trade and training. And I think that everything that Ron introduced us to conceptually, as far as the direction of the labor market, really points to hopefully some good news for everybody in our industry that, more formalized training, hopefully higher wages, and, really a focus on creating work environments that have a great culture, but also an enormous amount of passion. These are themes we've talked about, but I've never really seen any projections that's told us that, it should go that way, but it looks like it might start going that way. That's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcast, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast application. You can also access bonus content for certain episodes by downloading our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. We certainly appreciate a rating and review because your feedback is important to the show. And if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover on a future episode, just send an email to info@beyondclean.net. On behalf of Hank and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean.